Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. Baseball parades, football coronations, Lamar over Tom Brady. And this week we go back to Cincinnati, where I'm sure to be having it two ways, and with the cinnamon chili and all that good stuff and cheese. This guy I've known for going on 25 years. Baseball Tonight at ESPN back in the day, in the 90s, back when Davey Johnson ran wild and Cal Ripken played baseball. Gary Miller is now at Local 12 in Cincinnati, WKRC. In Cincinnati News, you can find him at Local 12 Gary, and I'm sure some baseball will be a part of the conversation now that the Nationals have had their parade. But Gary, you got one hell of a bad football team there in Cincinnati, and I hope that we're not coming out there to have the Bengals do a number on us. And I know I was going to have you on last month, but boy, things are tough for the Cincinnati Bengals. I'm sure plenty of good seats will be available this week, correct?
Oh, God. Yes, far more empty than full. They claim, there's been games this year where they announced the attendance at upper 30s or 40,000. And if it's half that, I'd be shocked in actual people in the seats.
For where they were with Marvin, and, full disclosure, I'm great friends with Marvin. I love me some Marvin. I think Marvin did all the help and damage he could do there over the course of a decade and a half. But, boy, there's a hangover, right? I mean, it feels like we're back at Bruce Coslett all over again.
Feels more like David Shula, actually.
Okay, fair enough.
But, in terms of the age appropriateness of Zach Taylor. But, I like Zach. And Marvin was not, despite your friendship, he wasn't the easiest guy to deal with. And I host the coaches show, so we had him every week, one-on-one, for a half an hour on various topics. But I think where they miss Marvin most, and, the chorus was just getting loud here. And I think Marvin kind of wasn't that upset about leaving after the 15th year. I think he was fighting, and there was all those rumors the year before.
He and I had three different dinners, Gary, in our friendship, where they always play here at the end of the year. We always go to dinner the night before the game. 3 different times I sat with him in Baltimore thinking he was coaching his last game at the Bengals, where he sort of believed it, not fully, but sort of thought this is, we called it our last supper. We had it 3 different times before it happened. Like, literally, he survived everything there and never won a playoff game, and it wasn't good enough. And now what do you have?
Now you don't even have a playoff. You're not even close. But I think where they miss Marvin most, and the game in Baltimore at the end of the 17 season is the one that saved that job, that beating the Lions. Beating 2 playoff-bound teams is what got him another year. Plus, he has a very close relationship. They were actual friends, he and Mike Brown. They talk about having dinners together. I mean, that's very unusual because Mike Brown is not the most approachable, convivial sort of guy, and he and Marvin would sit together on the bus, on the plane rides. This year Zach Taylor sitting behind Mike Brown, who just sits alone in his front row on the bus. But I think that was a big part, and I think where we miss Marvin most as Bengals fans is he became intimately involved in player personnel decisions, and not all of them were great, but a lot of them were, and they were certainly better than they've been, this year. The guys they've got coming in, and last year's draft wasn't very good either, so I guess you can blame Marvin a little bit for that, but they don't really have a GM. They have Duke Tobin as their player personnel director, but he takes all of his orders from Mike Brown, and I think Marvin was a lot more involved in the draft and in player acquisition, and no one seems to know, besides that Mike Brown says he's still involved, and he's sort of given it over to his offspring, Katie and Troy, the next generation. And I'm not sure how astute they are or how locked in or how much different it would be if they took over the reins more, which Mike Brown said they are doing when he meets once a year in the summer. He'll meet with the media for one afternoon in July. That's your only access to him all year. And he admitted during that one that Katie and Troy Blackburn are taking over a lot of his responsibilities.
Well, in the case of what they're trying to do and what the plan would be after Marvin's exit, and look, I go back to baseball with you. Look, the Orioles stink and the Nationals had a parade, but we all sit here with the Orioles and say, well, we know what they're doing. They hired these guys from the Astros. They're going analytics. They're bringing in Elias and at least there's a chart there for it. You know, they have a course that they believe in. What are the Bengals? I mean, does anyone really understand what the course was after Marvin? Because it obviously feels like now they're going to stink and they're going to go try to get a quarterback and build it from there. Because a couple weeks ago, I talked to all the Cincinnati guys. When I didn't have you on a few weeks ago, Dunlop, Atkins, all these names, they're all familiar to us. We know even Dalton was playing them. We're familiar, but that's the past. That's not the future. I guess the future is let's see how bad we can get some draft picks and start over again. But to your point, who's picking the groceries? That's the most important part.
Right. And they would never admit, and I kind of tend to believe, based on the limited access we have to Mike Brown, he literally said this July, and he kind of says it every year, I go into every game expecting to win that game. And he's not just, that's really unrealistic, but I think he firmly believes that he's got, equitable talent to the team he's facing, and that they should win or have a chance to win every game they're in. So I don't think they are doing what maybe the Dolphins are doing or the Falcons will start to do now. The teams that have no hope of making the playoffs, I think, and Zach Taylor says this adamantly, the new head coach will say, we're going to win as many games as we can, starting with the second half of the season. It's a whole new season. Their goal is to go 8-8. So I don't think they're, and as far as the philosophy or I think their idea was, we've had Marvin for 16 years, he's the second longest tenured coach in the NFL. We've been doing the same thing for a long time. We're just mediocre. We're not good enough to make the playoffs the last few years. If we make the playoffs, we're not good enough to win a game. We would lose the wild card game. We finish 7-9, 8-8 if we're good, maybe 6-10. Let's change this up. And they saw the McVay model in L.A. and said, this is the wave of the future. And Zach Taylor's the quarterback coach, so let's steal some of that thunder. And I think going into the year, we thought, okay, we have Dalton, who's a competent quarterback. We have Joe Mixon, who led the AFC in rushing last year. We have John Ross, the fastest receiver in the NFL, who sometimes scores or somehow figures out ways to score touchdowns. We have Tyler Eifert coming back, and we hope he can be healthy for once. And we have A.J. Green. So we have some weapons to do a lot offensively. And then the injuries started piling up, and, now they're – and the offensive line, it doesn't matter how many great players you have. With this line, there's only so much you can do offensively. If Zach Taylor is indeed innovative and, the next generation, he can't really show it with the personnel they have right now.
Who is Ryan Finley, and what can we expect this week?
Well, Ryan Finley, the good thing about Ryan Finley, unfortunately, he is not Lamar Jackson or Kyler Murray or the different quarterbacks who have given the Bengals fits on defense, but he is more mobile than Andy Dalton, and he's a little bigger. There's a mixed book on Finley. There were some that thought he should have gone in the second or third round out of NC State. Bengals, I think, felt, well, wait a minute, this is a second or third round talent. We still need a backup quarterback. They grabbed him in the fourth round. He was pretty awful in OTAs and spring camp. Then he was really good in the preseason games, very efficient, very accurate. But again, you're playing third and fourth string defenses and guys that don't even end up making the teams you're facing. So we're about to see what he can do, and obviously the Ravens is not exactly the team you want him to start against. Unfortunately, it's not the Jets or the Dolphins maybe, or maybe even actually the Browns wouldn't be much of a favor either with their pass rush. But it's going to be interesting. If A.J. Green is practicing, there's been a threat that he's going to play ever since week 3. But I think when they had the London game and he decided he wasn't going to play him and they got the bye week, he practiced on Monday. So, going forward, he's going to be at least questionable, if not in.
Gary
Who
Miller
knows what he's going to have?
Absolutely. Gary Miller's our guest. He's local 12 Gary out on Twitter, and of course, longtime ESPNer, now in Cincinnati at Local 12 and at WKRC in Cincinnati. In regard to A.J. Green, you say he's been threatening to play since week 3. That's always our biggest nightmares. If he plays, oh my God, it's A.J. Green, what's going to happen? But the Andy Dalton thing and riding him to the pine and having never won the game and the association with Marvin Lewis and all of that, I find that to be kind of unfortunate because when I think of Andy Dalton, I think of a guy who killed us repeatedly, over and over again.
What a class guy, too. I mean, he's not the most interesting or innovative interview, but he always answered the questions. I had the most respect ever for him when he talked after the benching happened, and he was pretty brutally honest. Andy is not a guy who ever goes the negative route, and he didn't go full negative, but said he was very upset that they waited until about 3 hours before the trade deadline to tell him. So his agent didn't really have time to explore other teams, and we know there's several other teams, including the Bears, who could really use Andy Dalton. A.J. Green, same thing. Trade him to a contender. A.J.'s 32 years old, has been playing. They both came in together the same year, and they had quite a bit of success early in the first half of their careers. They made 4 straight playoff appearances, and they were a threat. And I just don't think it was fair to Andy because he's not the problem. But I do see that they need to see what they have in Finley before next year's draft. Is this guy good enough that we can say, okay, we've got a quarterback that can take us at least to a playoff position or contention in the AFC North? So that part I like, but I didn't like the way they did it. And, Dalton, it's funny, Dalton has all their rushing touchdowns this year. He's not really a running quarterback. And if he hadn't scored in the last minute and a half in the meeting in Baltimore, they wouldn't have had an offensive touchdown. They had the kickoff return for a touchdown, then did nothing. And then they did this drive in garbage time to score the only touchdown from either team in the second half. And Andy ran it in mostly because you don't expect it.
Well, it's fascinating for me because we played Cincinnati a couple weeks ago, and it was competitive. But more than that, most of their games have been relatively competitive. They're not the Miami Dolphins. I mean, they've lost 21-20 and 23-17 and 26-23, and they've got blown out twice. But my goodness, for being an 0-8 team, I don't think we're getting off the bus there and winning 52-0 on Sunday. I don't think it's that kind of a matchup.
No, I don't either. I think, they have a history of playing the Ravens tight. It was 23-23 in the series going into that meeting earlier this season there. So, and who knows what the factor is going to be from the Sunday night game, getting up for and then not only answering the bell, but throttling the Patriots. And now you're coming to a team playing that's 0-8 that you've already beaten this year. Who knows what kind of letdown. But from watching what Lamar Jackson did to them last time, I know in the second half they only got 2 field goals, so they must have figured something out. But if they don't, and nobody's really been able to contain Lamar, so I can't really fault the Bengals, even though it was a historic outing against them in terms of running and passing combined. I think that's going to be the difference maker. Plus, you've got a guy who's never taken a snap in an NFL game that counts, starting at quarterback for the Bengals behind a line that's on its 4th-string left tackle who's supposed to be his main protection.
Oh, Gary, you make me want to spend the weekend in Cincinnati talking like that, coming in there, winning a football game. Gary Miller joining us here. He is Local 12, Gary out in Cincinnati, and, of course, a longtime ESPNer on the baseball side. So we had a little parade around here over the weekend. It wasn't local, but it was, all the fans that used to root for our team, they picked the new team, and their team won. Man, I don't know what to make of all this, and I know when I saw you here a few weeks ago, we talked about baseball and the future of the Orioles, and there's 23 months left on their lease, and nobody's going to the games, and they're clearly going to lose 100 games again next year. But then there's the whole notion that this other team's down the road and has all the money, has all the players, has all the victories, has a bigger fan base and a bigger market, all of that stuff that's going on. I'm gravely concerned about the Orioles here, and, you're in Cincinnati. I mean, the Bengals stink, but the Reds, haven't figured out how to get up and run either, right? So in your market, right, baseball is beloved and Pete Rose way and all of that stuff, but the Reds kind of make it hard on the fan base there too.
They do, but I think there is a sense that there's a better direction going. That they actually will sign some free agents. They'll go for the mid-level guys, So they had a really good pitching staff this year. They do have some young talent. They do have a guy who beat Tony Perez's franchise record for home runs by a third baseman, and Eugenio Suarez almost beat George Foster's team record for home runs in a season. So they've got some pieces, and Aristides Aquino came out of nowhere and is suddenly he's one of the top power hitting prospects in baseball. So it looks like they have an outfield. They have one of the best glove men at shortstop in Iglesias, who actually hit a little bit. I think one of their problems is Joey Votto, who's still got a lot of time left on his contract and not a lot of meat left on the bone.
But it's no Chris Davis.
Well, no. Joey's still, although Joey's strikeout rates have gone up dramatically, and especially called third strikes. I mean, that never used to happen to Joey Votto. He probably had the best understanding of the strike zone, one of the best in baseball, certainly in the National League, and he's not only lost that, but he doesn't have much power anymore, and he certainly doesn't have speed, and he's not a Gold Glove first baseman anymore. So that's kind of a hole in the middle of your rebuild. So it'll be interesting to see what they do in the offseason, but I think people feel better about them than they do about the Bengals. But what's interesting is the AFC North is certainly, as what Cleveland suspected wrongly, is a division you can turn around and go and get in a hurry. I think if you make the right moves, you can get into contention pretty quickly. I just think that obviously the Ravens are run better than the other teams, and Pittsburgh's had a lot of injuries and people who have defected due to contract situations or things like that. But obviously Pittsburgh looks a lot better than they did at 0-3.
Kevin Gausman wound up in Cincinnati. I bet a lot of Oriole fans don't even realize that.
Yeah, and they were pretty excited when they got him. We got him for nothing, obviously, and then he's gone already. They're not re-signing him. But, the same thing whether Baltimore to bring him back. I mean, the guy has some interesting talent. He has some things that you say, this guy he's had his moments. And so I think teams, and the Reds were the next one, that said, well, we'll figure this out. We can harness this because this guy can throw the ball. He's got some great stuff. And they turned out, didn't know how to use him really. He'd have one good outing as a starter, then he got completely shelled. Then they put him in the bullpen and didn't use him. Then they brought him back because they had injuries. So I think they were just taking a flyer to fill in, because like most teams do these days. Every team is starting to throw pitchers 4 or 5 innings so that by the time you hit July and August, post-All-Star break, your bullpen is completely worn out. And you've got guys either DL'd or they got nothing left. So you got to go find some arms.
Do you still like baseball the way you did? I mean, the changing of the way the game is played and the shifting, and I mean, forget the playoffs where the pitching's all screwy, but just in general, sitting and watching a baseball game with these true outcomes and launch angles and all of the things you'd be talking about if you were on Baseball Tonight that I may or may not understand. But it does feel like a different sport. I mean, if you've gone away from it for a couple of years and you come back to it, you might not recognize it.
Oh, no question. And I think, I've had some discussions with a lot of deep-rooted baseball fans, even during the football season when we're out to dinner or whatever. And, like you mentioned, and there's a similar history with the Orioles. Obviously, the Reds are the oldest franchise in sports, and certainly in baseball. But, their fans are deep-rooted and remember the glory days. The Orioles have had, that's what's so sad about the Orioles is they've had such a great tradition of winning baseball and success that this is almost unheard of, that they could be this bad and have this little interest in them and not even have anybody you kind of hang your hat on. Like I said, there's some guys on the Reds that you get pretty excited about, even if they finish 4th or 5th in the division. But I agree with you in terms of watching, and it seems to me the hires, I think Joe Girardi gets hired in Philadelphia. He's kind of an old school guy, but I think he gets hired because he's willing to totally embrace analytics. The clown that got fired in Houston for the remarks he made to the female reporters after they made it to the World Series, he's the assistant GM. These guys have no background in baseball. They're totally analytic. They come from an Ivy League school, and, they throw the numbers at you. And I think now you have to have a manager, even if he comes from somebody like David Bell, who goes back several generations in baseball. If you want to really go back to the way baseball used to be, go back to his grandpa, Gus Bell. But if you don't embrace analytics, and he has, you're not going to get a job.
Gary, I want to have a little fun with you because I'm out on the Local 12 website, your website here, because I saw Dave Parker. I saw a little thing. It's the Reds. Look at this candidates for modern baseball era for the Hall of Fame. Dave Parker, Hall of Famer, yes or no? He might get my vote. Like, you know, but I'm just going guy by guy. There's 10 names: Dwight Evans, Steve Garvey, Tommy John, Don Mattingly, Marvin Miller, Thurman Munson, Dale Murphy, Ted Simmons, and Lou Whitaker. They're all sort of like the Hall of really good, right? Like Marvin Miller, the fact that he's not in, I'll make the argument for him first.
Well, yeah, Marvin Miller is, you know, I think that's just
spite.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, there's no question that he's one of the most influential figures in the history of the game. He changed everything and continues to be. I agree with, I think Parker's at the top of that list. We once did, back when the up-close days, back in the days when you could have a half-hour interview show.
I do that all day, Gary. That's what I do here at WNST.
We did a cusp of the World Series, and we had Tommy John on, we had Goose on, we had Maury Wills on, and I'm trying to remember who else we had on. We didn't have Garvey, although he was an LA fixture, but Goose has gone in. I think Parker's at the top of that list. I'm not so sure about Garvey. I don't know. There's a lot of all-star appearances. Parker's got the MVP. He was a dominant on both defense and offense. You know, played in World Series. I just think he was an incredible presence. Batting title. You know, I just think his resume is baffling as to why he hasn't gotten more attention than he has. And I'm a pretty strict. You know, there's guys that are in there. Well, Harold Baines.
Yeah, I was just getting ready to say Harold Baines didn't even think Harold Baines deserved to be there.
He was a Baltimore native. Sorry, and I loved the Bill Veeck White Sox when he was on that team, but I never understood why they retired his number.
Well, I look at this list and I say, Dale Murphy, Hall of Famer. Tommy John had a lot of wins and a long career, and they named a surgery after him. I mean, I guess, but like, Lou Whitaker, if you're going to put Trammell in, you got to put Whitaker into me. But to me, Mattingly, not long enough. Garvey, I agree with you. Dwight Evans, love Dwight Evans, but not a Hall of Famer.
No,
I
agree.
But and Thurman Munson, the unfortunate death, the whole deal. But I see these names 30, 40 years later. We're still talking about them. I do think it's nice that there is a second chance. I mean, my cousin was on the last year of the ballot in '84. He wasn't going to get in, and if he didn't get in that time, he never would have gotten in. You know, now he's a 35-year Hall of Famer, but he would have been one of those people they would have argued. But I put Dave Parker in the Hall of Fame. I'd have no problem with that.
Good. All right, well, we'll start the campaign.
Let's go do that. Sunday, December 8th, I see it's there. Gary Miller, he is local 12, Gary, and I'll see you in Cincinnati. Is there anything in Cincinnati I've never done that I should do? I mean, I'm stuck in Cincinnati on Saturday, Gary. Give me something. Give me something I should do, something I should eat, somewhere I should go, man.
Well, you said two-way chili. You got to have at least four-way. So you can add the onions.
Oh man, the indigestion's already built in. You don't need to add. You don't need to add accoutrements to have indigestion there. You know.
Let's see. What else did we do? Well, you know, we got the usual chains. I'm trying to think of. We have pretty good barbecue here.
Yeah. Oh, get some Montgomery Inn or something like that. That's easy enough.
Yeah,
right?
Montgomery Inn's always, and especially the one down at the stadium, because the views are great. It's right on the river. So, yeah, just be glad you're coming now and not December. We got games with Cleveland. We played Cleveland twice in the last 4 weeks, including the very last game of the year in Cleveland.
Well, I was going to channel Sam White should say, at least I get to come to Cincinnati this week. I don't have to go to Cleveland. I got to do that at Christmas, though. Gary, always a pleasure, man. Thanks for coming on and making some time. Always great to chat with you. Gary,
here, Nestor. Look forward to seeing you.
You got it. Gary Miller, he is Local 12. Gary out on Twitter and out there at I was going to say Kansas City, Cincinnati, doing it at Channel 12 and local12.com, the way to find him and them, and a little baseball conversation there to mix in because they have parades in D.C. and we don't have them here. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. I'm on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and Snapchat and Instagram and anywhere we travel this week. Luke is out in Owings Mills. We're off to Cincinnati. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore sports.